Hello and welcome back to another edition of Disruptive RX with Dr. Inderpal Randhawa. I'm Sean Andre, and we have a very special guest here today. When we talk about partners in crime, yes, I'm a partner in crime on Disruptive RX, but there's a true partner in crime as we delve into the very beginnings of the Food Allergy Institute. So, our special guest today is Herman Sandu, who is the Senior Manager of Software and Data Informatics. So thank you for being here, Herman.
Thank you for having me.
So we want to jump right into it, Dr. Mandawa. So obviously what you've done is extremely amazing. It's life-changing. You've given thousands and thousands of kids their lives back. They're able to consume foods that they were previously anaphylactic to. So when we talk about a true partner in crime, the very beginnings of the Food Allergy Institute, how does one go about choosing that partner in crime?
No, that's right on, Sean. I think when you look at disruption, right, we're talking about the initial phases. What are you trying to do? It started. It started really after I had my initial inclination to try and solve this problem, and then I had to gather the people, gather the patients, and say, all right, who really wants to participate in this? And this is going back 15 years now. I had an opportunity to try and do this locally, like just patients who were right nearby. And I had to get somebody to work in one of my local offices. And, I had opportunities and options, but, I had this guy because he also happens to be my nephew.
Oh,
So
okay.
happens to be my sister's son. And I said, hey, you're a young kid. If you want to come on in and try and work this office angle, make it happen. Fast forward, he knew pretty quickly I was going to be doing this food allergy work.
Sure.
And we had to start to recruit patients, and it went on from there.
So, what is there like one particular thing that you saw in him, or was it a bevy of things or a bevy of qualities that you saw in Herman that said, you know what, he's going to be great to work with me and to help this come to fruition?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is now how many years have we been working together?
13.
So, 13 years later, the qualities are pretty much the same, and these are the same qualities. I like your Batman Robin analogy here. You need somebody who has the same amount of tenacity to try to want to solve that problem.
Mm.
And he's demonstrated that in his early phase when he was not so much in the data science, through all of the data science, machine learning, software development, all the stuff that's happening now. It's been that same level of tenacity to say, no, we're going to solve this problem. Full stop.
So let's go back to your background, Herman. Let's delve into that. Please tell us about that. Expound on your background, and did you ever think you would be doing something like this?
Yeah, I mean, so I had a unique upbringing. I, went to college a bit earlier than most, and I was also a bit lost at that time, right? So I had actually dropped out of college when I was about 18 and a half, and really didn't know what I was going to do. Happened to get a call from Dr. Mandawa where he was like, "Hey, are you interested in this type of work?" And I don't know if you remember this. I actually said no
That's right.
originally. And I was
Yes.
like, "Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't think I want to do that."
I was initially denied.
Yes. And but ultimately I took the job, and as Dr. Manawa said, I didn't actually start on the food allergy side. I actually started with one of his local private clinics, really actually more focused on the rare disease aspect. But as the momentum started to grow towards the food allergy side and what that would entail, that's really where I started to step in and help where I could. Ultimately, I think that Dr. Manawa, in giving me the job, gave me a purpose. I've always been very driven, like I'm going to go get stuff done, but I didn't know what I wanted to get done. And even when I first started, I wasn't even sure what my future would be. I didn't think I would end up where I am now,
Mhm.
but I had such a desire to learn and understand. And I had the privilege of also just working right next to Dr. Manawa and being able to just pick his brain and understand, which gave me the ability to understand all the inner workings of the program,
Mm.
from start to finish, from the business side to the clinical side to the research side to the data side and to the software side. I started to piece together how all of this would be put together and allow us to ultimately, expand FAI to offer that treatment to as many children as we can.
How important is that? That's a great point that you brought up because you knew every piece and every, facet of that. Is that like extremely important to be able to work with them and just to know the inner workings, like you said?
Yeah, I mean, I believe so. I mean, ultimately, when you look at how do you integrate software into your business, it's important to understand what you're trying to achieve with that software. a lot of people will bring in software to hopefully increase efficiency in some sense, or give them new tools to operate with their data. But I ultimately knew that what we were doing here was so complex that unless you had somebody that understood the fine details of how enrollment impacts the food lab, how enrollment impacts your incoming workflow of patients, how do you tie all that together? How do you take the data connected to the information you're collecting in five different places and put it in one place?
Well, to me, it seems like it's one thing to know the inner workings, but to be able to piece it all together, as you say. One of the initial questions I asked Dr. Randhawa, that I think, did he think of himself as a genius? So I've called him a genius.
Hmm.
I've also called you a genius.
Hmm.
Do you think of yourself as a genius?
No, not at all.
Why do you say that?
I think that I have I don't think that there's anything intellectually that I possess that nobody else possesses, but I have a desire to learn. Ultimately, I have a choice when I'm bored. Am I going to go pick up a video game, or am I going to go learn something new? And
Yeah.
it was instilled in me, from a young age, that look, the more you can grow and understand, the better off you are. And that's the type of mindset I operated with. I'm not I'm not clinically trained in any sense. I'm not, a data scientist by training, but I understood that that was going to be important for what we needed to do. And I just dove fully into that.
Is that important for you, Dr. Randhawa, to have somebody that's willing to learn? He has all the intangibles, but somebody that's willing to learn, somebody that you can actually teach. How important is that to you?
It's 100% critical. I mean, if you look at the complexity of what's happening, right? You're taking a disease that is, it's not like you're anaphylactic to just one thing. Most
Right.
people are anaphylactic to multiple foods. The degree of their reactions can range from, maybe not so severe to extremely severe very quick. And then you look at all the inner side of the immune system and how it operates. That's just the biology of it all. Now you're trying to actually bring in applied math, machine learning, AI systems, and human operators into the whole mix. It is beyond complex, right? And so you have to have the patience and the determination to want to kind of get there. And he's certainly seen it. I mean, you're talking about meetings that were going till midnight, bringing very small teams together, big teams together. And as a word I always used to use for when we were building things, and I would call it human software.
Hmm.
Sounds like a strange concept, but I said, no, we're going to organize our discovery and our approach to get this done. And we'll take these groups of humans and essentially run data through them as if they were software. And built on that concept, you're going to actually build the right kind of software, the best type of user interface, and it will be, I'd say, relatively smooth as opposed to how a lot of companies build software.
So the way you built that, is that one of the main reasons why it's so successful? Because of that very thing you just said? I mean, from top to bottom, and how you built it
Correct.
with human beings,
Yeah,
actually.
exactly. You got to operate from the middle. That's what I always say. You operate from the middle. So wherever, if it's one side is a clinical side and one side is a research side, we're going to operate in the middle. That's what TPERC does, right? It's translational. It's in the middle. It's translating across both sides. If we're going to build something that's software-based and it also has to have a clinical function, we're going to operate from the middle. And I think all too often, tech companies, software companies think they can just stay on this side and gather information, and they produce a product that just does not work very well. Operate from the middle.
So we've heard stories going back to the Food Allergy Institute, its humble beginnings. We've heard stories about you and Herman working in this quote unquote basement. And, when I think of the optics of that, I think about two guys, doing this and doing this and something like, exploding. Like, can you take us back and expound a little bit on the beginnings of the Food Allergy Institute?
Look, going up until 2009, it was smatterings of patients and data across different systems, different hospital systems, patient systems. Once I had that, by 2009, I had already had patients in, quote, treatment, and I'd bring them to where I was at in Long Beach. Around that time, I had, the opportunity to operate a clinic inside a hospital. That was a choice. I didn't have to do that, right? But I was, to be frank, concerned. I mean, this is high risk, high reward. And if we make a mistake, I couldn't have anything bad happen. So I literally asked for rooms that had a code button in the room. If everyone knows what that is, right? That means like kind of in a hospital, right? You pull a code button, the whole team shows up to rescue you. I was that concerned about it. So I basically said, all right, let's get those rooms set up. And then that's kind of where Herman initially started. But I mean, he'll tell you, I mean, it was it was the Wild West. It was
Yeah.
not easy,
It was
and we had to try to control so many factors. And I'll quickly just mention a story. There was a mom, when you do all of the treatment for a tolerance induction program in FAI, it is you have to be on time, but how you communicate those things. And there was a mom who forgot to give her child a dose of peanut, and was calling in and trying to get a hold of things. And I had to go meet her in a Trader Joe's parking lot
What?
because she had missed a few days and was very concerned. I was like, look, he'll be fine. You can go ahead and give him this dose. And he's communicating with her, and I have to go meet her in a parking lot, literally saying, all right, give him that dose and he'll be just fine. And sure enough, he was fine.
Wow.
Yeah. But I mean, like, that's how wild it was back then.
So I'm sure you have many stories like that in the very beginning.
Yep.
Where you had that maybe a communication breakdown and you had to rectify it on the spot, because otherwise, if you didn't, I mean, what would happen?
It could be catastrophic.
Yeah, and I think that what has been lost as we have grown is that people see all the support systems that are in place now. Back in the day, that was just Dr. Now and I, right? Like he took call longer than I did, when with the after hours phone call, but I took that same for about 5 years straight, right? There was not a day off that we had. We were responsible for the safety of these children, and I think that as we've grown and expanded, things have gotten smoother. But back then, I mean, Dr. Randhawa and I were seeing every type of clinical visit for these patients mixed in, right? So we'd have a group of new patients that were starting, we'd have a group of patients that were about to graduate, and patients that were in the middle, and we are bouncing back and forth, all while we're also actively like preparing their doses to go home with
Wow.
same day. So yeah, I mean, back in the day, it was the Wild West. I mean, there were days where we were 6 hours behind on seeing our patients. We would be
Wow.
at clinic until 10, 11 p.m. at night. But as Dr. Randhawa said, that's where the tenacity came in. Of we understood where we were going and what we needed to do to get there.
Well, that's why, we were so excited about having you on. And I keep referring to you as a partner in crime, because that's how society is, right? Like, society just kind of sees how an operation is now. You walk in, it's so smooth, and nobody misses a beat,
Yep.
but nobody ever talks about the beginning of, an operation and what would take place, and you're 6 hours behind on seeing patients. And so, the respect factor really comes in. Not that people don't have respect now, but when they know about the beginning,
Yeah.
it's like, wow, you guys went through all of that,
Yeah.
and look at how it is now.
And I would say the thing that I think probably doesn't get enough attention is the hardest things that had to be done at that time were recognizing what kinds of clinical reactions could take place. Anybody who deals with food allergies knows reactions can come fast and furious. And again, these are life-threatening. And we had to make sure that not only we could recognize them and manage them effectively, but we had to collect that data. And we had to really know, okay, what is the level of risk for these patients? And, it was, man, it was hair raising. It was, I'm talking about literally inducing, symptoms in these patients, luckily being in a hospital setting and having to reverse those things.
Sure.
Not something that I ever want to do again, but it was critical information and data that allowed us to get to the point where we are now, where we can very kind of tightly predict these things. And we had, I remember we had this one kid who all testing, at least back then, was negative to sunflower seed.
Yep.
I was like, okay, everything looked like a green light, go. This should be fine. And he had I don't remember his initial dose, but it was extremely small. And his reaction was overwhelming,
Wow.
and to sit there and remember, you're talking to parents who are looking at you like, what did you just do to my kid?
Right.
Right. And so ultimately he graduated, did fine. He's finished the program. He's in remission now for probably,
I mean, it's
been,
about to be like 10, 11 years. Of
yeah,
remission.
quite some time.
Yeah.
But those are the things that, again, people will never understand,
Right.
because we'll never have to do that again.
Sure.
But I think that's that's an angle that deserves some recognition.
So how did these patients find you? Or how did that process take place?
You could take that one.
I would say there was two parts to it, right? There was obviously the work that Dr. Randhawa was doing at Long Beach Memorial and the inpatient clinical care, right? He was seeing a lot of these patients suffering from anaphylaxis that were admitted into the hospital. That was one major side of it. And then really it was just word of mouth. I mean, ultimately, I don't think we properly anticipated how quickly patients would come on board. I mean, we were at a point to where our wait list was written on a yellow notepad,
Wow.
I mean, and that notepad contained almost 700 names on it, and I would essentially every Saturday for almost a year hold these phone calls where I would bring a group of families together and just hold this 2 hour session of explaining it to them. Ultimately, that obviously has translated into what we do now, but at that time, it really was everybody came in and said, "Hey, we heard about this." It was so novel at the time. There were really no other practitioners, at least in the state of California, that I knew that were attempting this type of work. So it just was open gates of everybody coming, and yeah, that was a challenging time.
Wow. I mean, yeah, you had no team behind you, really. It's really you two guys at the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were. I mean, I was handling all the phone calls to prescription refills to all the tasks that a front office individual may do. Then we had the food lab side, right? Which at that time we didn't even have a food lab. It was Doctor and that one and I in the background just measuring 5 milligrams of some cashews, some this and that, and so yeah.
Well, I love for you. That's amazing. This is mind blowing. I would love for you to expound on TIP, the actual program. It's the Tolerance Induction Program. Can you expound on that and how it got its name? How did you come up
Yeah.
with the Tolerance Induction Program?
I used the term tolerance for a long time. I mean, like that was the goal. And as I told folks way back then, I said it didn't make any sense to me if you're going to create a therapy that the therapy doesn't result in two things. One is you should be able to consume any amount of that food, because if you're saying, all right, you can only eat this much, how do you expect a human to be like, I got to measure this, or what does that mean? It was too vague, right? So it had to be unlimited. You have to be able to eat like a non-allergic person. That was number one. Number two, what it took to maintain that level of remission, that type of a deep tolerance state, had to be not a headache. It couldn't be something you had to do every single day, every 3 days. No, it had to be once a week or even less than that. And those were my two primary goals going back almost 20 years. And we've achieved those goals, right? So that's essentially what our endpoint is for our patients. They come in, they're anaphylactic to all these foods. They only have to consume typically a group of those foods once a week or every couple of weeks for the first number of years, and then it even goes to lower frequency than that. In the meantime, eat whatever you like. Enjoy yourself, right? Literally like a non-allergic person. How you get to that point was the work, right? So that required us to build not only the clinical aspects that we were just discussing here, right? All of that information and data that had to be gathered amongst hundreds and then thousands and now tens of thousands of patients. But then the immunobiology, really understanding the immune system and really understanding the plant proteins as well. That all happened really kind of predating most of Herman's time. And then that combination allowed us to build the AI technology. And what do we have now? We have a forecastable treatment. Imagine that, right? So you can now take a person, draw their blood, and forecast their time to remission, and with a very high degree of confidence. I mean, heck, if I had high blood pressure and somebody could say, here's your forecast so that in 9 months on these cocktail of medications, you will have completely normal blood pressure. That doesn't even exist.
Right.
We've taken a very complex disease and created a path forward to a state of remission, which is huge.
Wow. I mean, so is it just me, or has this happened in a record amount of time? Because typically when you look at something in the medical field, I mean, we're talking years, if not decades.
Yep.
And you guys have done this in how many years?
I mean,
15, 20 years.
15, 20. I mean, that's 15, 20 now.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's been in effect for, I'd say under a decade. It was very much on point.
Wow.
Less than 10 years.
And I think it's important to touch on the vision that Dr. Randhawa had at that time, right? I mean, 10 years ago, well, call it 12 years ago when I started, he was talking about this stuff, right? Of where he wanted this company to go. And he was back then talking about AI and machine learning, which at that time, I really don't think much of healthcare was even around that region of thought. And he had the wherewithal to organize his data sets before I got here into what it has become now. And looking at the ability in the span of 2.5, 3 years to build an entire machine learning and AI model that has essentially taken the work that he and I do down into milliseconds, right? Like when it came to analyzing patients' results, like I don't think people understand that 10, 12 years ago, we were doing this on paper, writing things down of what their entire sequence was going to be, which would take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half per patient. Now we can do that entire process in milliseconds.
If the naysayers don't believe you now after saying this, I don't know what else. That's pure hating at that point.
Yeah.
If they don't believe you. Because I know you sometimes still get, the naysayers and the haters.
You know,
You do as well. Huh?
absolutely right, and I think it's gotten less right over time. And we just published a pretty significant paper as a result of TIP in the top journal in the world of allergy. I mean, that's just recognition by the peers that hey, there's clearly something good happening here. But have they unwrapped it? Ah, heck no, no,
No.
not even close.
Gosh. The patients that you treated early on, do you still have a relationship with them? Do you talk to them on a regular basis? How is that like?
I will.
By the way, he was so good at what he did for a long time. Patients would leave and then they'd call back and they'd say, "Yeah, we talked to Dr. Herman." And so, yeah,
He hated that. I never
Really?
corrected the patients either. No, but I mean, I will say, I mean, when I first started here, I had no ability to hold a conversation with somebody I did not know.
Oh, wow.
I mean, some of our OG patients really were going to Dr. Now of like, why do you have this kid around? Like, why he's not going to be here in 5-6 months, and 13 years later, I'm still here.
Wow.
But no, I mean, ultimately, it was such an intimate relationship with the patients, right? Like
Sure.
we were seeing them every 6 to 8 weeks. We were talking to them in between those 6 to 8 weeks that they were coming in. And I mean, for me, it really became like a family. Like all of these patients are my extended family. I feel a responsibility and an onus to make sure that they get to the finish line and further.
At any point in time, did you ever think about throwing in the towel? Like, or getting so frustrated early on before you really truly saw the success? Did any point in time, you know what, no, I'm just going to, you're already a doctor. You're already doing, like, did you ever have those thoughts?
Honestly, no. And I'll tell you why. Because I think the hard work of theory development, when you develop theories, right, theories and laws, right, when you develop a solid theory and you have continued repetitive success, you can't walk away from that. I mean, it doesn't matter how hard it is to build a company or build, enrollment processes in a food lab and all that stuff. It works, and it doesn't work a little bit. It works to a point of remission. You can't walk away from that.
Right.
There's no way.
Right. Can you talk about and expound on the transition of the initial treatments to the gummy form of the treatment? That's fascinating. You're going to enlighten a lot of people here talking about gummies. But if you can talk about that transition, in the process, that'd be amazing.
I mean, I'll hand off to him on this one, but I think it's important to understand if you look at the mechanics of a medication. Let's talk give me a medication name. Pick one. Motrin. You have a headache, right? Okay.
Here you go.
So Motrin, ibuprofen.
Okay.
When the FDA says you X manufacturing facility have to produce this pill of Motrin, and it's 200 milligrams of Motrin per capsule. Is it 200? Is it 195? Is it 225? People don't think about this, right? But with the FDA, their current restrictions, that error can be around 10 to 15%. So you can be off quite a bit. Well, and maybe that's okay because again, there may be no harm in that, in that particular scope. But for what we do, we had to make sure that dose of protein, right? Because remember, we're using particular food proteins, we're getting the immune system prepared, and then we're ultimately utilizing the actual food protein itself. We can't have 10, 15% error. We can't have 5% error. We can't have 3% error. We have to be under 3 and often under 1. So we purchased, $25,000 plus scales. We had to have them, organized in such a way that we had to measure these things out manually. This is what we were doing for such a long period of time for these patients. And it worked great. Then the question began, if we're going to scale this treatment to the masses, we have to change the model. We have to get that level of accuracy, and we have to get it into something. And my idea with the gummy was there mainly because I love the concept of let candy be your cure, right? In a way, right? Let candy be. I mean, if you talk to kids who have food allergies, the one thing they can't have is candy. The worst time of year is Halloween because they can't eat that stuff. Let's give them something that tastes good, that actually accomplishes, therapeutically what it should, and they can actually have some fun with it. But I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I remember the days of having to hand dose, these 1 milligram, 2 milligram doses, and it was drilled into me, right? You got to have less than 3% variance in the dose, right? So when you're measuring 3 milligrams, even like a tenth or a hundredth of a shift in that has the potential to trigger a reaction, right? So imagine trying to measure 3 milligrams of macadamia, right? Macadamia is a very oily nut.
Sure.
Trying to measure 3 milligrams of that was miserable. You got 3.1 milligrams. You're trying to take out this little speck and pull it out, right? And I think that a lot of patients don't remember that we used to serve them in these like little. I don't have a better word than Jello shot cups.
Yeah, salsa cups. Yeah.
Salsa cups. There you go.
Okay.
And so from a patient's perspective, they were even more worried because they were like, "Hey, I see this little speck trapped in this little crevice of the
Wow.
salsa cup, right?" And
Wow.
so ultimately, I think the gummies really had two major impacts. One was from a anxiety perspective. The simple sight of an allergen, is a difficult thing for a family or a child that suffers from food allergies, right? So putting it in a gummy form where they visually are not seeing what they're allergic to was a
Sure.
game changer. I really think the compliance, I don't know if we have the numbers on it, but I do think the compliance of our program dramatically increased as soon as the gummies were introduced. And then really, I look at it from a operational perspective and how efficient we were able to become. Right now, we're able to have instruments that are able to drop very specific amounts of an allergen into the jelly to create the gelatin. Whereas back in the day, like I said, it was just these hand dosing.
Well, did you believe him? Like the day that he said, you know what, we're going to put this in a gummy form. Is that something that you thought was possible? You wanted it to happen, like you said, because it's so difficult to do it, the other way. But
No, he did
he
not.
didn't have it. Okay.
So,
Thank you,
so
Dr. Randhawa, for being honest.
here's what I will
Candid.
say. When I first started working with Dr. Randhawa, he used to say what I thought were a lot of crazy things.
Okay.
But ultimately, across 13 years, I have learned that no matter what he sets his mind to, it's going to happen. And so, yes, I was not a believer back then. I'm 100% a believer now. I will never say, no, you can't do that. But ultimately, I think that's what has driven him and ultimately seeing him push and look for new ways of innovation and really how do you tie in the patient experience into all of this
Sure.
was important to me as well.
How can anyone not be a believer after saying this? The future of the Food Allergy Institute. What do you envision? And I'd like to get your thoughts on that too. After.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that Herman's been critical in helping develop. Again, I talk about operating from the middle, the entire network of what data science can do. So now, look, we're in a position where people sign up for the program. It's in this network, so we know really right away how long they're in the program, what our manufacturing facilities have to produce for them, what our clinical sites have to do to support them, what our command center that supports them from home remotely needs to do. And imagine having that data for their entire duration of their program and incorporating into every part of the organization. All of a sudden, we have full control, right? There's no surprises. We know how much we have to order to produce, to extrapolate. Everything just starts to make sense. How far away are we from this kind of amazing network? Almost like a matrix, if you will, based on data. What would you say?
Close to 6 months. I think we are
6
about
months.
6 months away from having just a closed network.
Wait, I thought you were going to say like, years.
No.
Something away. 6 months.
Hey,
That's right.
we push and ultimately, I mean, to be fair, this is a project I've been working on now for better part of 2 years. And I will say, 2 years might seem like a lot of time, but if you understood what we've actually built, which is a disease-specific electronic medical record system that is housed on top of an entire data warehouse that powers all of our AI, our machine learning, all of our business metrics, operational metrics, our supply chain metrics, all of that is housed in one place. Entire control of access, where data is flowing in our hands.
Wow.
And you don't see that in healthcare.
Right.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Anywhere,
but
zero.
yeah.
We can have the finger on the pulse of the organization at any given time.
Yeah. And I think it's
pretty cool.
it's as AI and machine learning becomes a bigger part of healthcare, let alone society as a whole, I think it's important to, at least ask yourself, do you view, AI and machine learning as a product, or do you view it as a service? I think those are two completely
Yep.
different things,
Yep.
right?
Wow.
And as Dr. Manawa was saying, you operate in the middle. So is what we've built a product, or is it a service? It's somewhere right in the middle.
So correct me if I'm wrong. The future of healthcare, as it continues to infuse AI in treatment, it would be impossible not to come back and look at this model and specifically look at the Food Allergy Institute, because you're the first to do it. Nobody's done it. And so years and years and years from now, if somebody does not go back and check up on their history and give you guys your props, that would be a complete disservice, right?
Hands down.
Yep.
That's it.
All right.
First to get it done.
That is it. I love that. Thank you again for joining us for the special edition of Disruptive RX with Dr. Inderpal Randhawa. Herman Sandhu, thank you for your time.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
having me.
I'm Sean Andre. Look forward to seeing you next time.